All right. Hi, everyone. Good morning slash afternoon. Excited to be here this morning slash afternoon to talk to you all about prototyping, my favorite part of game development. This is Sprint 2. Our goal this week is going to be making something playable and making it as fast as possible. I will briefly introduce myself again. You've seen me already at this point, most likely, but I did bring photos this time of my past things that I have worked on. So hi again, everyone. I'm MJ. I am a PhD candidate at the University of California, Santa Cruz. What I've done in the past, about 12, 13, 14 years ago, I did a master's degree at Carnegie Mellon's Entertainment Technology Center. This is where I learned to make games. This whole master's program was really about rapid prototyping. We made all kinds of interesting experiences for different kinds of hardware. After that, I worked at a hardware startup company. So this was really interesting doing like hardware prototyping. We were making this 360-degree treadmill called the Virtuix Omni. So I've done both software prototyping and hardware prototyping. I also worked in AAA for a little while. I worked on Call of Duty and Mafia 3 as a designer and a game scripter. As I said, my favorite part of game development is prototyping. So I actually did not really enjoy working in AAA games because there's not a lot of prototyping that happens there. But it was cool working on those two games. I also started my own independent game studio called Astaire Games, making mostly mobile games. And I also have done a fair amount of games for change or games for advocacy. This animated one down here, this is actually a game that I made for the Climate Jam way back years ago, back when it was only a 48-hour jam. So this was a little game I made about recycling and composting. And then this one up at the top here is a game about wildfire preparedness. The one on the top left is a VR game about the water crisis in Texas. And then the bottom left is a game about financial literacy. I also have taught game design at the University of Texas. I'm wearing my UT t-shirt actually. So I taught game design and game programming at the University of Texas, including mostly VR classes for 7 years, and then also prototyping classes, which were my favorite classes to teach. And I really enjoyed just seeing how much stuff people can make and how quickly they can make it. And then now I am a researcher as my primary job. So I used to make games and now I study games. So I'm doing research on games for resilience, which is why I'm helping out with the Climate Jam this year. So enough about me. So I'm here today to talk to you about Sprint 2, which is prototyping. So you just finished the ideation sprint, Sprint 1, which means you have a bunch of cool ideas. Maybe you have picked one, maybe you have picked a couple that you're still thinking about. And hopefully you thought of a lot of ideas before you narrowed it down. Hopefully you've done a little bit of research about the type of natural hazard or disaster that you want to address, and the people who are impacted by it, the communities where those disasters happen. Perhaps you have even reached out to some of those communities and talked to folks. And if not, maybe you have looked up stories online of people who have had those experiences to get some understanding of what you can address with your game. So now you have an idea or a couple of ideas, and it's time to start making stuff. I do see there's chat. Oh, it's just Parker's link to the prototyping sprint. So yeah, we're gonna start making stuff. So what is a prototype? A prototype, very broadly speaking, is an early sample or pre-release of a product that's built to test a concept or a process. I like using photos of chair prototypes because they're really fun to look at. So here is an example of a chair prototype. What's really helpful about prototypes is if you can make them in a flexible way that you can try different things. In this particular example, you can see the straps holding the chair up so you could raise or lower it to try it at different heights. It's important for a prototype to be functional so that you can test it, but it is absolutely not the final version of something. And so it's important to think about it in terms of something you are going to throw away. You are only using it for testing. Once you're done testing it, you throw it away and then you move into production, which is a separate cycle. And don't think about it like building on your prototype. Instead, think about it like, okay, we're going to make some prototypes, we're going to test some things, we'll throw that away, and then we'll make the real one. As you are prototyping, it's important to be testing your ideas, gathering feedback. Playtesting is a really valuable part during prototyping, and then iterating on those designs before you commit to one for full-scale development. Now, even if you have a particular idea that you want to work on, there are probably a lot of different ways that you could approach it. And so I encourage you to prototype different ways to think about that idea, before you lock into the thing that you're going to build. One of the really valuable things about prototypes is it helps you uncover design flaws or usability problems early enough in the development cycle that there is still time to fix it. If you just dive right in and start building the final thing, and then halfway through you discover that there's design flaws, it's very difficult to pivot at that point. So the prototyping phase allows you to make those pivots while there is still time to course correct. And hopefully you're prototyping multiple ideas, so one of them will pan out to work the way that you think that it should. So how do you actually make a prototype? How many of you have made prototypes before? Let me see the thumbs ups or any kind of reactions. Anybody made any kind of prototype, even a paper prototype? There's some thumbs ups. Yeah, so making a prototype is a very common way to start game development. So if you have made any kind of game before, oops, that is not my slides. How do I bring my slides back? There they are. So if you have made any type of game before, you have probably made a made a prototype. There we go. Here's my slides. If you have made a game before, you've probably made a prototype at some point during that process because it is a very common way to get started. You could spend a very long time deciding what you want to make, but eventually you'll realize that you have used up all of your time and not made anything. So the idea with a prototype is to just start making anything and then to iterate on it and refine it. This is called the iterative rapid prototyping cycle. So you start with just about anything as your starting point for your prototype. You do some review or testing of it, then you iterate on it, and then you have a new version of that prototype. And you can do this cycle as many times as you want or as many times as you have time for. And you can do it with as many different prototypes as your resources allow. Then once you have something that you're happy with that you think can actually be turned into a full game, then you deliver it typically to the team that is going to fully develop that game. In this case, you're delivering it to yourselves. You'll be delivering your prototype to your team starting next week, as you head into production. But it's still important to think about this as a standalone cycle that then ends with a delivery. So once you are happy with your prototype, then you say, okay, this is the idea we're going to move forward with. We're going to throw away all of our placeholder art and placeholder code, and we're going to build it with good coding practices and good art style and good sound design and that type of thing. So let's drill down a little bit into what things you're actually making for this prototype. So sometimes it's hard to get started because if you have, a personal quality standard, you'll want to think about making something good. But I encourage you to actually go in intentionally to make something bad. This actually helps you get started and it helps get past that sort of creative block you might have at the beginning. So in terms of art, go in planning to make bad art. Just draw a stick figure on a piece of paper and take a picture of it and then put that in Unity or whatever game engine you're using. You can block things out with a white boxing tool or gray boxing tool. There are a lot of gray boxing tools available. Unity, I think, has one built in now called ProBuilder. It used to be a standalone tool, but now it is built into Unity. Or just make textures and put them on cubes. One of my favorite prototypes a team from my class did was they went around their house and took pictures of things, and then they dropped those pictures onto cubes, and then they made the game using just like random photos of objects from their house. For sound, there's some free voice recording apps for phones or for laptops. You can just record your own voice making random noises or random sound effects. You could download some free sound effects from freesound.org. Anything you can get your hands on quickly just to convey the idea. The point with both the art and the sound in a prototype is just to convey the idea that you're going for. If you need to use UI in your prototype, just use the default UI. You can change the color to help give it a little bit of an aesthetic direction, but you don't need to make UI assets from scratch for a prototype. Same with particles. Unity and other game engines have like default particle systems that you can use, so you don't have to spend a lot of time making something. The goal is just to have enough stuff to play around with that you can then test your idea out. And then animations, you might think of animations as something that is kind of part of polish. It's typically added at the end of a project. But animations, if you create really rough animations, it can help a lot with showing movement. And this can help you solidify the player's understanding. When you're doing playtesting, you want to make sure the player understands the idea that you're presenting them with. And animations can actually help a lot with that. And then, very importantly, because this is a game jam, make sure you're sharing what you're working on in the Works in Progress channel. I just want to quickly switch over to Discord and show you we have a Works in Progress channel now. I posted my team's design document from the first sprint. But as you're working on your prototype, please share what you're working on here. It's really helpful to see what other people are doing. It really gives people a lot of inspiration and motivation. And so by posting things here, you will help other people in the jam. Okay, I don't know why I brought my slides back up. The next thing I want to show you is a very short little demo that I put together in Unity. So I made a prototype last night, spent about 15, 20 minutes on it maybe. And just to show you what I mean about making things quickly and not worrying about the quality. So I made this little character, drew a stick figure on a piece of paper, took a picture of it. I made a spike trap, so I'm going to have a little character that walks around, takes damage when they step on a spike trap. I recorded my own voice saying ouch. Maybe. Well, oh, I think Zoom is not allowing me to play my audio. That's okay. Hopefully it will play in the game. So I put my little 2D drawing of a character on a capsule, and I added a very tiny script, which I'll show you in a moment. And hang on. Ouch. Oh, there, it's working. Hopefully you all heard that. Okay, so I made a script so that when I step on the spikes, I have a little red particle effect to show I took damage and a sound effect saying ouch. That's my own voice. And then I have a coin. You pick up the coin, plays a little sound effect, the coin disappears, and you get this you win screen. And my script for this, about 12 lines of code. All I have is like the input controls for A and D to move the character left and right. I have a trigger collider to check if I stepped on a spike trap. This plays my sound effect and my particle effect. And then I check if I step on the coin, and that plays a sound effect and destroys the coin game object, and then turns on the win screen. And then I made just a tiny couple of animations. I made the coin animation to spin, and then I made a fade-in animation. It's really, really subtle, but when you win, there is a tiny fade-in animation. So that is super rough assets just to convey the point of the game. It shows the mechanics, shows how you win, it shows how what the player's objective is and what they're trying to avoid. So they're trying to avoid the spike trap, they're trying to pick up the coin, and that shows the basics of the gameplay. So that is the goal of a prototype, is to show how those things work. And let me share my slides again. So you might have noticed that my prototype looked bad, and that is okay. In fact, like I said, I encourage you to plan to make your prototypes look bad. If you set out to make your prototype look good, you're going to spend a lot of time trying to make it perfect and not enough time testing your ideas. So don't waste time making things perfect. Just make as much stuff as you can as quickly as possible. The point is to convey your idea and to allow people to playtest and give you feedback on your idea. So as early as possible, you should be asking people to playtest your prototype. So what are your goals for this sprint? So I mentioned using whiteboxing or grayboxing tools. So a great starting place is to block out a level so you can get a sense of the space. This lets you get a feel for how much space the player is going to be able to move around in, how are they going to navigate the space, where would you place obstacles, where would you place the objectives, and how long will it take the player to get through the level. Now, I mentioned not spending too much time making things look perfect or sound perfect, but one thing that is helpful is to make one really nice of each important asset, both sound and art, so that you can show what the art style will be. Just one is enough. For example, if you're making a game about birds living in the woods, you might make one bird and one tree, and add a sound effect for the bird that is of high quality, maybe a sound effect of wind blowing through the tree. And that is enough to be a beautiful corner that conveys what the game would look like and what it would sound like. Like I said, you don't want to spend a lot of time making things look perfect because you won't have enough time to test all of your ideas. But if you make one asset that looks like what it's supposed to look like, that can really help people understand what would your game look like. And then the minimum viable product, MVP. So this is the functional part. This shows the core functionality, like what I just showed, with a character that can move around, take damage, pick up a coin. So what are your core mechanics and how can you prototype those functionally so that people can test the core loop of your gameplay and understand how would the player win or how would they progress. Sometimes I get pushback about this, like, oh, I want to make a game where you don't win, and that's okay. But there should be a way that the player knows that they are progressing at least. Now, a sort of stretch goal for you, you might think, oh, well, if I make a playable level and I make a single asset of each type that I want to show my art style, and I make the core functionality, maybe I could bring all of those together into one spot. So you could use your one good asset in your gray box. You could put your tree and your bird somewhere in your gray box. You could add your functionality into that gray box, and then you could actually test all three of these things together. You do not need to put all three of them together, but if you want to be very ambitious about what you can test with a prototype, testing all three of these things together, that would help you understand things like how big should your art assets be inside of the level, and that can help inform your production cycle. So there are benefits to pushing yourself to be able to combine all of these together, but at the very least, having each of these three pieces allows you to get a really clear sense of what you are going to make for production, and it will get you started on a great starting point. So with that, let me stop sharing my screen and ask if there are any questions. And just in case anyone is super, super new to Unity and not sure how to get started, I did export the Unity package that I created for that little prototype. Just if you want to be able to see an example of how to combine a texture with a capsule or how to write those 12 lines of code. But if you already know how to use Unity, don't bother opening that package up. But if you're super, super new and you want to play around with that package, it's there for you. So any questions? Anybody want to say what your idea is that your team is going to make? Oh, I see a question in the chat. How would you recommend thinking of systems that are causing a lot of thinking to happen? Of this one that's making me really confused on which version of it is better. Okay, so systems that are causing a lot of thinking to happen. I assume you mean thinking for the player. Is that right?
And you
I'm
may
gonna
turn
assume
on your mic to expand on this question if you'd like.
I'm gonna assume. Oh, go ahead. Yes.
Hello. Yeah, this is Chris. Sorry, I was trying to change my name. Yeah. So what I mean is there's a system in the game where I'm trying to think of how it should like play out while the player is playing the game, and there's a couple of different ways that it could work, and I'm not sure which one to go with. And I know we can just choose one and go with that, and then if it doesn't work, and try the other one. But I want to try both at the same time, maybe, or just like have a way to go into thinking about it to understand how it should work. And I was wondering if you had any suggestions for that.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And thank you for expanding on it. I understand it much better now. So my suggestion would be to try to test both. But what is important with with a system, especially if it's kind of a complex system, if you have two different ways you're thinking about it, and they might both be difficult to implement or to test, So what I would recommend doing is something called time boxing, where you dedicate a specific amount of time to building one of them out. So plan to make both of them and plan to test both of them, put them in separate scenes, put them in different scripts so you have them completely separated and you can test them independently. And spend maybe an hour or two. I don't know how complicated the system is, but spend a couple of hours on one of them and spend a couple hours on the other one. And what that will tell you is if you can do it quickly, if you can do both of them quickly, then they're both viable, which means you could actually fully implement them. And then you can test them both and see which one people respond to better. And you can put it in front of players. Now, what you might find by this time boxing is you might find that one of them is significantly easier to implement. And then you might want to do that one just because you can make a lot more stuff. So yeah, I recommend pick a specific amount of time that you think is reasonable, maybe 2 hours to spend on each idea. And if you get both of them playable in that time, test both of them. If only one of them is playable in that time, think about the advantage of doing the easier one, just because then your team has more time to do other aspects of the project.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Other questions or other people that want to share their ideas that they're going to work on. How would you recommend approaching prototyping for a game that has a narrative arc over a couple of scenes? I haven't read the rest of the question yet, but the prototyping narrative, what I have seen a lot of people do for prototyping narrative is to do it in Twine because you can write a lot of stuff out and test it very quickly, and then you can migrate it into Unity once you're kind of happy with your narrative arc. I think doing narrative and dialogue in Unity is a little bit time consuming, but doing it in Twine is very quick and easy. So you can test the story itself independently from the rest of the game. Creating a prototype for each scene is probably not viable given the week-long time frame. Yeah, so I absolutely agree, and that's where I think Twine can be helpful. And Twine does, I think, allow you to add images, and so you could have an image that represents the scene. You don't need a lot of action happening on the screen if the point is the story. Having the player go through the dialogue choices with like a single image can help you test out different narrative directions, different ways that you could present the story to the player. And then also, just in terms of thinking about like, oh, is there enough time to make multiple scenes? Make things like really dirty and really quickly. So like absolutely you can make a couple of scenes. Just don't spend very much time on any of them. Like I was saying to Chris, time box, give yourself a certain amount of time that you'll spend on one scene and then move on to the other scene and don't get sucked into making the whole thing all at once. Well, I hope right after this, everyone will go and share in the works in progress what idea your team decided to go with. I'd love to see everybody's ideas posted there and see what everyone is working on. If anyone has done concept art, I'd love to see your concept art posted in works in progress. Works in progress is my absolute favorite channel during jams. I love seeing how things progress over time. So put your stuff there.